Bienvenidas y bienvenidos. De nuevo, estamos esta tarde para tener la sesión del webinario, de hecho, que empieza con la Universidade de Aveiro, Resiliencia Urbana ante los retos futuros. Ese es el webinario. Vamos a tener 3 masterclass y en esta tarde de hoy tenemos el placer de contar con Myriam Lopes. Em, Myriam es profesora asociada del Departamento de Medio Ambiente y Planificación de la Universidade de Aveiro. Posee un doctorado en Ciencias Ambientales Aplicadas y es experta en contaminación atmosférica y licenciada en Ingeniería Ambiental. Buenas tardes. Como investigadora, Myriam cuenta con una amplia experiencia en proyectos de ámbito nacional e internacional. Tiene más de 150 artículos publicados y es integrante del grupo de investigación de modelización de emisiones y cambio climático y del Centro de Estudios Ambientales y Marinos de la misma Universidad de Aveiro. Además, Myriam ha colaborado en el desarrollo de planes de descarbonización y estrategias de adaptación al cambio climático, tanto con instituciones públicas de ámbito nacional, regional como local. Y como decía, en el marco del webinario de LAIF City Life, Resiliencia Urbana ante los retos futuros, pues estamos con ella para plantear cómo las ciudades afrontan impactos climáticos cada vez más intensos y frecuentes. Entonces, bueno, hay que tener en cuenta que partimos de un contexto en el que los cambios en los patrones climáticos ya forman parte de nuestra realidad, no importa dónde estemos. Hay desde olas de calor hasta inundaciones, fenómenos extremos, no nos libramos de alguno de ellos. Entonces, entender la vulnerabilidad urbana y la necesidad de adaptar y rediseñar nuestras ciudades para hacerlas más resilientes, pues se está volviendo un reto clave tanto para el presente como el futuro de nuestros territorios. Así que entendemos que este es un tema realmente apasionante, muy en vogue, muy al día, muy necesario para todos nosotros, no importa desde qué lugar estemos. Así que esperamos que sea del interés de todos nosotros. Cerramos aquí la introducción y damos paso al espacio de sesión con Myriam, que va a ser en inglés. Solo quería hacer un último apunte. En el chat tenéis las indicaciones, aquellos que queráis tener la traducción en vuestro idioma, pues tenéis las indicaciones de cómo realizar ese ajuste para que podáis escucharla, pero leerla en el idioma que habéis escogido. Pues muchas gracias y empezamos.
Hola Marta, muchas gracias por esta invitación, por estar aquí y compartir un poco mi experiencia con este tema. Me gustaría mucho hablar en castellano, pero no me siento muy segura de la lenguaje técnica, entonces me voy a mover al inglés. Espero que puedan seguirme y hablaré un poco despacito. Lo intentaré y luego veremos. Muchas gracias y buenas tardes a todos. So, moving to English now. Thank you so much again for this invitation. My talk today will be about impact of climate change in urban areas, and I will focus mostly on risks and vulnerabilities. Um, so the first thing that Marta, it was the starting point of Marta was saying that climate change is something that is already happening. In fact, I think there is no doubt about that the climate of the Earth is changing. It's not exactly the same in all places, and the rate of change is varying a lot along the globe. Here you have just the changes on temperature, but we have also changes on other weather parameters like precipitation, moisture, and precipitation patterns. And what this brings to us is that, in fact, a part of a natural trend, we have all this urban contribution to climate change, and mostly to global warming, but also to climate change. And of course, looking to this the cities or urban space in particularly, we need to account with other additional challenges. And this will be mostly the focus of this talk. So cities are at the front line of climate change. So more than half of humanity is living in cities. We have a lot of pressures in cities, and disasters most of the time are not only caused by climate hazards, but also because they are a combination of other important factors that our urban spaces present their own characteristics, and related with the planning, governance, and developing patterns. So, as I was saying, more than half of the population lives in cities nowadays, and the projections to the future is that they will be even more. So we are concentrating to big cities nowadays. We talk about megapolis or mega cities, and this can be shown in these figures, these two graphs that presents the evolution. I will put here my laser. You can see the evolution on not only on build-up area, but also on population. And you can see that the rate is almost the same, and people are moving mostly for urban areas. And so in terms of building up area per capita, we need even more space or urbanized space to support the type of activities we are looking in urban spaces. So cities nowadays. So it's not only about cultural aspects, but also about job opportunities, education, social services. So, and if you compare what the urban areas offer to citizens, we can understand why people prefer to live in cities. In particular, young people, so new generation, is a generation of citizens, people from the cities. And as I told you, the number of mega cities is increasing, and the area and population in these mega cities are also increasing significantly. And here you can see the top 10 of the biggest cities in the world. And as you can see here, we have some cities that are now coming from these big cities coming from developing countries, and or countries that are in a very rapid growth rate. And of course, as can you imagine, this will pose some additional challenges to urban spaces. I would like to highlight here the case of Dhaka, or for instance, the case of Shanghai. So in the middle of the last century, Shanghai was a fisherman village, and nowadays is one of the biggest, is the fifth, and will be eventually the third biggest city in the world. And in this graph that I took from this World Urbanization Properties Report, you can see that in fact there is a kind of correlation between this the gross domestic or gross national income per person, and the size of the city or the percentage of population that is living in the urban areas. And yeah, of course, when we think about this, we need to also to address other points like uh, more people or cities concentrate more people and they need more infrastructure. They have much more economic activity and they need much more resources, much more energy to support, but also the system should be able to manage all the wastes, wastewater, pollution, all the process and problems that are generated in the urban space. So climate change can transform existing urban problems in systemic risks. Um, and but cities are also a point of attraction, but at the same time, they have a lot of challenges, not only about climate change, but about the development process they are facing, in particularly in developing countries like countries in Latin and South America and in Africa. For instance, I bring here a graph that maybe some of you already saw this graph in some other presentation. I really like this picture because you can see how active, how complex can be a city like New Delhi in just one day. So we have here in marriage, divorces, we have here a huge amount of water needed to support a population, but also the all activities that are carrying out on cities. And you need a lot of transport and mobility patterns. So you have 1,000 new cars coming each or buying each day in the city, and we have a lot of accidents. So when you put climate change on the top of all this complexity and all these problems and challenges, we understand that in fact we have just an additional level of problems to solve. And then you can see what's happened in the news. I took some news from some from newspapers. They are in Portuguese, but I suppose you are able to understand. We are talking about heat waves here as the top of disasters in Portugal. But we have also storms more recently. I have one slide about that in front. We have also these records in the heat waves are not only in Portugal, but for instance in Turkey, 50 degrees. This happens also recently, I think last year or even this year in Brazil, in other parts of the globe, and this is really a challenge. And of course, we can address the causalities related with this, but here I'm just presenting one of these extremes that or one example of these extremes to say that we have also vulnerability here in Pernambuco. This is not also about people, but this is also about casualties, about health, and about some costs related with, for instance, hospital admissions or to support for diseases or absence to work. These are just some examples. But I suppose you'll have another talk later on time, and I will have another colleague talking about the impacts on human health. So to think about the risks related with climate hazards, we need to think about this connection that is under the risks. We have, in fact, three big pillars that can show us or can help us to understand the risks. And in fact, risk is the intersection of the hazard and we have different hazards related with some climate events or meteorological or extreme meteorological conditions. And then we have this part related with exposure. So exposure is when you have people or some activity located in a risky area, so that could be affected by this hazard, and then you have the vulnerability of the system. So a good example is, for instance, if I have a hurricane in the ocean and I don't have any people there, eventually there is no exposure and the risk does not exist in the area. But if this hurricane comes to an inland part or a coastal area, in fact, it will generate strong winds, for instance, or heavy precipitation, and this will and if there are people or some infrastructure located in these areas, then you'll have an exposure factor to be considered. But additionally, depending on this resilience of the system, so its capacity to resist to this type of event, it can be the constructions, it can be how the system is prepared to face this impact, then the risks can be bigger or smaller depending on the circumstances. For instance, in this picture that I asked to artificial intelligence to generate, you can see these informal settlements and in a very risky area, very vulnerable area, and we have this soils displacement due, for instance, to heavy rain, and of course more vulnerable houses can be affected with this type of event. So risk is, by conclusion, it's an intersection between hazard or the event itself, the climate event, and exposure and vulnerability of the system. And then we need to think about to address this type of strategies, or to think about the impacts. We need to address both the three dimensions. In this case, I try also to bring here some examples of hazards that can happen in an urban area. Again, with the help of artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, it's a very useful tool, by the way. So in this case, you can see that we have extreme rainfall or heat waves or drought or sea level rise or storms. So it can be different type of extreme weather events occurring, eventually not exactly at the same time, but along the year, for instance, or in a certain period. The same urban space could be affected by all these events. In a more realistic way, I pick up some pictures that I found to be interesting, that shows us some examples of these risks, including some impacts. For instance, we have here the destruction of some houses that were located in a risk area and with the sea level rise and stream flood, or they can be destroyed eventually completely. Or we can talk about water scarcity, and also about air pollution, for instance, during heat waves that can be affected. In Portugal, due to very warm days, we have a big problem related not only with air pollution, but also related with drought, and more important even with forest fires. In some years, we have records like 5% of Portuguese area being burned by forest fires, which is a huge amount, a huge percentage of the territory. So as a key message for you, I would like to tell you that climate change increase hazards, but urban decisions should determine exposure and vulnerability. And so why cities amplify these climate impacts? There are different factors I summarize here in these groups. We can have geographic factors, so depending on the location of these cities, they will be can be affected more or less by different type of events. Of course, population density is a very important issue, but not only the density, but the characteristics of this population. Eventually, if there are some vulnerable groups, and I will talk later about that. So social economic capacity. So if we or cities are invested and are training people to be more resilient and more adapted to the circumstances, to be prepared to face these risks, the impacts will be lower, and by consequence the risks will be lower also. Also, the urban infrastructures and their dependence. For instance, if we have redundant systems, in the recent years in Portugal, we have some events some extreme weather events that collapse completely part of the system, for instance, related with electricity, and this affects transport, this affects communication, this affects hospitals, and a lot, and it almost create the failure of the system. And this happens even this year, more recently, in January, final of January, February, that we face a it was eventually the worst storm in Portugal, and an important part of the country, in the central region of the country, in the coastal area, was affected by this. And so this cascades effect, the failures in cascade, can be very important when we try to address these urban infrastructures. Of course, urban morphology, the characteristics like topography, effects, and so on, but not only. And finally, these natural environments can be very important. I bring you about the geographic factor just to show you in this graph that different areas of the planet are facing different challenges. Some parts of the planet are the impacts are more related with glacier snows or permafrost. We can see this in near the poles, Antarctic and Arctic system. And then we have impacts on the rivers, lakes, floods, and drought. Sometimes it happens both effects. For instance, recently in Amazonia, they had big floods, and after some months, they have very strong droughts in the Amazon basin. And this is the change of the water cycle that is affecting this type of circumstances, these effects. And then, of course, most of the cities in the planet, and eventually the big cities, are located in coastal areas or near coastal areas. This is or near important rivers, deltas, and this is due to this global trading that most of this is done by maritime way. And so coastal erosion and sea level rise is also an important risk in a lot of these areas, and an important harbor cities. Like in Portugal, we are having also some problems related with coastal erosion and for instance, water intrusion, saltwater intrusion in some underground reservoirs of water. But then we can address also some biological systems. This is more or less spread by all the planet. But for instance, when we look for food production we have some areas that can be more affected, and eventually in some no, some high latitude countries in North Europe, they will have better conditions to develop some of these activities like agriculture or even tourist activities, because the climate is becoming much temperated and more comfortable for this type of activities. Another important issue that we need to address is about the fact that climate impacts are not equally distributed. So it depends in different conditions. In this picture, you can see, in fact, that we have a lot of different disparities, socioeconomic disparities in the planet, in almost all urban areas, in particularly in the suburban areas of the cities, and this is even more important in Latin America and South America. And part of this is related with these mechanisms like poor housing or quality or less insurance or limited political representation of these vulnerable groups, the poorest or the marginal groups of population. And they don't have also access or have limited access to recovery resources. And at the same time, they sometimes are in such position that makes them more vulnerable because they have a higher physical exposure. Their housing are not so resilient. They have a lack of basic infrastructure. You can see in the picture we have this very nice fancy house for rich people, and in this side of the road, just separated by an informal street, we have this slum area with no infrastructure, with no water supply eventually, and eventually without drainage system. So with no green areas to protect them and to absorb some, for instance, heavy rain. So, and then this type of resilience can be more affected and by climate change. So we have a problem of climate justice, or we should say climate injustice. But I will come back to this later. And also, concerning the morphology of the city and city characteristics, an important factor is, for instance, what happened in the gradient between the suburban or rural areas and the city center. So big cities usually they concentrate big and very high buildings in the city center. So in the commercial or financial area of the city, and then you could find some urban residential areas or commercial areas around the city center, and eventually we have this gradient to with more greening space, or eventually some ponds, some lakes in the surrounding areas of the city. And this creates a gradient of temperature because this infrastructure, the buildings area in the city, they can trap the heat, and they create this phenomena. So urban heat island effect is a phenomenon where cities experience a significantly high temperature in the city center comparing to the surrounding urban areas. And this happens usually because urban areas replace natural land cover with very dense concentration of pavements like asphalt, buildings that absorbs, for instance, buildings absorbs a lot of heat, and at the same time, in particularly in very in tropical or subtropical areas, we need or buildings needs a lot of air conditioners to cooler the system, and this puts a lot of heat to the atmospheric environment in the cities. And so the lack of absorption or the intense dark surfaces and the lack of green areas that through the evapotranspiration process can transfer some water to the atmosphere and create a kind of cooler effect. So everything is trapping this heat in the urban canopy and creating this gradient of temperature represented here by this line in the graph. Another important fact, so just summarizing, you can see here the key factors that affect the heat island effect. So the building environment materials, the vegetation or the lack of vegetation and natural surfaces, the impervious surfaces, because impervious surfaces, they can have also an impact in terms of urban floats or but these impervious surfaces, most of them absorbs a lot of heat, like the roads or the road networks. And additionally, we have a lot of human activities like transport and industry that are emitting some anthropogenic heat to the atmosphere in the urban canopy. So population density that affects these social factors, or some parts of the urban planning, for instance, urban planning that is not accounting for ventilation of space, because we are trapping the air inside with these big buildings in the city center, like we see these skyscrapers that we see, for instance, in New York. They don't allow to have this ventilation process. And finally, as I told you before, these climate conditions. So we have less cooling by winds, we have more heat stored by the buildings, we have a lot of these conditions affecting the heat island effect. Also, some natural environment can create climate risks. For instance, types of the morphology of the city. I share with you here a sequence of consecutive events that led to substantial health and environmental and economic impacts in Southern California. I suppose you remember that they faced some very strong fires, forest fires, but in a peri-urban areas, and eventually this affects a lot of urban areas with these very strong wildfires. I took this from a paper, and as you can see, between 2012 and 2016, the region faced prolonged and extreme dry conditions. Eventually, between the winter of 2016 and the spring of 2017, they have a lot of precipitation that enhances the growth of grasses and other fall vegetation. But then this very strong winds comes with some storms, and the hot, dry weather conditions reduce the moisture levels on the soils and vegetation, and this was the fuel to have these very strong fires. And after these fires, all this area was the land use, the land surface was really damaged, and after this, the burned areas have been affected by extreme precipitation, and then you have these debris flows that all are destroying some houses, and because of this soil slides that occur in the area. And this is also interesting because it helps us to understand, to see in detail how this process occurs, help us to understand um, a little bit about this uh, uh, about the disaster that sometimes we have. It's almost predictable if we make a strong analysis of the area and the natural environment and the characteristics of the cities and where they are placed. About, as I told you, social inequality is also an important risk multiplier related with climate change. Uh, in this case, we need to account with vulnerable groups that are often more exposed to climate risk, and this includes low-income households and informal settlements residents, also LGBTI populations. In this case, for instance, LGBTI population, they already have other diseases, some comorbidities, and can be more affected, for instance, regarding heat waves that because they have, for instance, cardiovascular diseases, and they suffer more the effects of this type of situations. Also, migrants, usually they are sent to the marginal areas of the cities to these more vulnerable places in the cities, to slum areas or areas without any infrastructure, and because of that, they can be more affected by this type of disaster. And also, some studies also refers that women and children are also at higher risk to be affected by climate disasters. Um, so, but of course, when we talk about these informal settlements and people living, these groups, more vulnerable groups living in informal settlements, we need also to account that this type of resilience cannot be seen only as victims. In fact, we can find some strong social networks inside this type of communities, eventually even more strong networks in these communities than in these more developed areas of the city where rich people are living. And eventually, because of the need to adapt, they have some local adaptation practices, some spontaneous practices, because they are learning by the process. And I bring here an example that I could observe when I was in Amazonia, in Manaus, where people uh, are uh, are building their homes. This, I suppose, I don't know if in Spanish you call palafita. In Brazilian and in Portuguese we call palafita. So they put their homes in these stakes here, and this will protect from the flood. Eventually, I suppose you cannot see very well, but here is the river. It's Rio Solimões, and in Manaus, near Manaus, and so eventually they are putting these branches higher and higher, but at a certain point they cannot put higher higher branches, and they just move their homes to another place in order to avoid the risk related. Here, when I was there, I visit a community during the flood. This was the dry season, and then I came back again. This was last year. I was visiting a community in the flood season, and as you can see here, we are the boats are are the main transport or the most important transport in these areas, and they just putting some small bridges to walk. This is a school. I was giving a lecture in this school, and I was moving to go to school, and sometimes they say that they have some crocodiles or some other animals here near the school, but they are used to this type of situation. So basically, I have a long collaboration with colleagues from the university, the Universidade Federal de Manaus, the Amazonia, and we published some works together. But in fact, you can see that eventually people are learning with the process, and they are adopting some spontaneous adaptation strategies. But of course, we can also assume more strong approaches, like here we can build some barriers, or we can even attack, and we can gain some area to the ocean. For instance, you have this type of a strategy, for instance, in Dubai, where they build these artificial islands just because they want to have very fancy areas for very rich people to go there and to get this opportunity. So community knowledge can be also important in these specific communities, and it's not just about the impacts, but also they can, in some cases, they are able to solve their own problems. So just to, to retain here, climate vulnerability is frequently produced before the climate event occurs, because eventually the way cities are developing, the expansion into unsafe areas like floodplains or unstable slopes or coastal zones, or eventually the deficits in infrastructure for drainage, sanitation, or even transportation, or even if some existing environmental degradation, they can be also factors that increase the risk on this area. So in this case, you can see here very important or very dense areas with no trees, with no green. Here is Shibuya crossing in Tokyo, that is one of the mega cities, the biggest mega cities in the world. And then this is part when the disaster occurs, we cannot expect other impacts other than this type of situation. So even in Japan, they face from every year, they face a lot of storms due to typhoons that are happen in the area, because this is one of the areas with biggest typhoons, and they are used to survive because they develop a lot of adaptation strategies and resilient. They implement a lot of resilient infrastructure to help us to support this type of situation. Physical, socioeconomic, or resource availability are important, but we need also to consider this dimension related with governance, because sometimes it's a part of this decision, or the way things are have been done is more related with the type of governance or local governance decisions that are impacting in how people are suffering with this. People and the cities are suffering with this type of situations. And this is what happens, for instance, with this Christine storm that affects the central part of Portugal, that what we assist in this situation was a complete disruption between local, regional, and central governance, and in some cases, in some places, people were more than 1 week without light, without electricity, more than 1 month without communication, no cell phones. So in the first days, it was really dramatic. I have family affected by these situations, and after that, the costs related were huge. So in Portugal, we are now passing for a new kind of financial program in order to try to recover from this big situation. And we were not prepared. So what this storm shows us was that we were not sufficiently prepared. And we are part of European Union. We have access with these financial resources and so on. But these things happen even in the most developed countries in the world. So moving to the next slide, just to remember that in fact we need to embedding climate change in urban planning and design, and of course in urban and local policy decisions, because otherwise we will not be prepared. The current situation, current disasters show us that we are not prepared now, but we need to do something to be prepared in the future. So we need to turn out our cities more efficient, so all the citizens more efficient, reducing the contribution of greenhouse to global greenhouse gases, and to reduce the contribution of urban areas to a global additional global warming is really important, because this is a way to prevent future additional global warming and other impacts related. But then we need to think about the way we are organizing our cities. We need to account with vegetation and water areas, water impact, with urban water drainage, because this is really important to prevent floods and storms. And then we need to think about the construction level, how our buildings are developed in order to be more resilient to face this challenge with a new type of climate, and more intense and more frequent situations. So to face this type of climate risks, we need to address in the first time we need to manage the disaster risk, and for that we need to prepare ourselves to anticipate this type of disasters and their consequences, and to be prepared to implement better responses, not only it's not only about evacuation, but also about protecting people, to have better alert systems in order that people to know what to do and where to go if this type of situations occurs. And then we need to anticipate, for instance, specific funds for rehabilitation and recovery. And then we need to adopt prevention and additional mitigation measures. But apart of that, we need to think in a future perspective. And for that, we need to address these adaptation strategies in a more conceptual framework. And for this, I bring to you, and because this is a short talk, it's just an introduction of this impact, I bring to you this convenant of mayors for climate and energy. They have even an urban adaptation support tool. And this is something very interesting, because in fact, I was participating in some of these municipal and regional or intermunicipal adaptation plans, climate adaptation plans, and they have this type of it's a kind of continuous improvement cycle where we start by preparing the ground for adaptation. So we need to know what people to involve. The best is to involve as much people we can, and the right stakeholders and the population representatives, NGOs, and so on. So bring all together to sit in the same table and analyze the local circumstances, and try to also involve local communities. And then we need to assess risks and vulnerabilities. So we need to look to the past, to recent past, and to try to understand what's happened, what were the most frequent events, extreme events, and what were the consequences of these events, what were parts of the system were affected, what parts of population were more affected, and what were the costs of this system, and what were the responses that we were able to implement in order to face this type of disasters. And after that, we need also to anticipate, based on the projections of future changes on climate conditions, if the type of events that we'll expect that will be more frequent for this specific region, specific area, specific city, we need also to anticipate what will be what risks will increase, and the type and what will be the vulnerable areas. Also, understand that cities are most of the time they are in a dynamic process, they are growing, and we need to understand where cities want to go in terms of land use. And then we need to identify these adaptation options. This co-creation process is very important. We need to sit and discuss with the local authors, because they are people that know better what are their needs, and what are their capabilities in order to implement this adaptation process. And then after we need to implement solutions. Of course, we need to assess means that we need to know exactly what is in reality, what is our possibilities to implement these options. We can also identify, based on a benchmarking with other cities, with other case studies with the same problems. We can learn with the process by sharing. It's a little bit what we are doing here in some extent. And then after implementing the solution, sometimes this took time, and we need to monitor and evaluate, and eventually we need to rethink again and restart again this process. So an important issue that I would like to bring to you is that it's the willingness to do this is very important. It's important that local governors are involved and wants to do and be part of this changing and transition movement. And this Covenant of Mayors, in fact, it started some years ago in 2008. And at that time, they launched this Covenant of Mayors, mostly focused on the mitigation part. And the idea was to reduce greenhouse gases and to think how cities can contribute to reduce. And this was mostly focused on, it was something developed by European Union and focused on European cities, of course. And then they started to think, some years later, they started to think about adaptation component. And then they realized that they should put all this together, and they introduced this compact of mayors, where they have also included this part related with energy efficiency and energy poverty. So we realized that some parts of the important parts of the population are not afford to implement and to have the needs for energy to support a good style of life and a comfortable life for families. And then more recently, they started to think on this the just transition focus on 2050, and because we have this roadmap to 2050 that is in alignment with the European Green Deal and the Paris Agreement commitments from European Union. I'm not saying by this that we are the best doing these things, but this is a way where we can at least learn with experience. And in fact, what we recognize now is that they try to create a kind of alliance driven by the efforts of these regional and national covenants, and now they have this type of approach spread and shared in other countries and regions, like in Caribbean, and also in, for instance, in Korea, also to Asia, Oceania. And so this is a kind of movement that is spreading and sharing these opportunities and mindset, recognizing the needs for adaptation on urban spaces. So urban planners and local decision makers should include this as an important point. And also, there are some other commitments where cities are also supported by an alliance of partners. For instance, these C40 cities that until recently they were led by, I think, by the mayor of Curitiba in Brazil, or for instance, the Eurocities, or this branch from United Nations, the UN Habitat. All these groups or associations and institutions are collecting and are trying to help cities to become more resilient to climate change. So, as central message to conclude, just to tell you that climate change is a global problem, but vulnerability usually is a local problem. And of course, the future of climate adaptation will largely be decided in cities, and urban planning can either produce or reproduce climate risk or become a tool for transformation. So the question is, what kind of cities are we designed for an uncertain climate future? And by this, I end my talk, and I thank you to be with me for these last minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Myriam. I don't know if you can see the screen, but sometimes the people just say thank you through the emojis that
Oh,
we
thank you.
have.
No,
But
I was too concentrated, in fact,
okay,
but thank you so much for
no,
that.
but yeah, no, very inspiring presentation. So, really, I mean, full of great information, very good examples, and so yeah, thank you very much for for sharing such valuable insights on climate adaptation and urban resilience. I mean, it's so necessary for all of us, no matter where we are, no matter what we do, um, but we need to adapt to, yeah, new events, climate change, and it's there. So thank you. Very, very, very inspiring again. Um, Before we leave you, we have some questions, but let me just switch into Spanish so the
Okay.
audience
You
also
can
can
ask me in
understand.
Spanish because I think I will understand. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Bueno, pues muchas gracias, le hemos dado muchas gracias a Myriam por la generosidad, por el tiempo, por la información y porque ha sido una presentación llena de buenos ejemplos y espero de verdad que a todos les haya parecido útil. Al final del día eso es lo que buscamos, que sea un momento de reflexión, que podamos incluso, como bien hace Myriam, nos está regalando su contacto para que si hay dudas, si hay inquietudes, puedan compartirlos con ella y en este caso, antes de cerrar eh, la masterclass de hoy, vamos a aprovechar un poquito el tiempo y vamos a hacerle algunas preguntas de las que los participantes también nos habían puesto en el momento en que sabían que esta masterclass iba a tener lugar hoy. Así que voy a hacer la pregunta en español y si hay algún problema, pues Miriam me lo dices y te la hago también en inglés. Empezamos. La primera pregunta que queríamos plantear es si puede compartir buenas, ya lo ha hecho, pero bueno, si puede compartir unas buenas prácticas de ciudades resilientes a riesgos urbanos.
Bueno, yo he anticipado algunas de estas cuestiones pero no lo incluí en la primera parte porque quería hablarlo en los impactos y la importancia del plan. I will change in English. The
That's
importance
fine.
of urban planning. But I put here and some extra slides I will share you very quickly if I can. So, for instance, there are different strategies. We sometimes divide in green or gray strategies, so we can use this strong engineering force, or we can just try to use the nature-based solutions. I will not want to talk too much on that because I know that we will have the next talk will be more about this topic. But in fact, I just bring to you some good examples. For instance, some of these are very famous. One of these is as this very hard engineering process that is creating some barriers in rivers to avoid this, even in the rivers, to avoid floods. And this is the case of the Thames barrier in London to
Mhm,
prevent floods in London. It was very expensive and even a piece of technology and art for the city. But for instance, we need also to think about, and there are some other solutions that could help us to absorb the water in the city. For instance, we can collect water in the roofs and then we can try to infiltrate water in the soil, or we can reserve this water in some reservoir to use to wash our cars or to irrigate our gardens. Even at the street levels, streets should have some drainage systems like storm drain systems in order to avoid to have these problems of flooding in urban areas, and also replacing the type of pavement that making them more permeable can be also a good solution to solve this type of problems. I will not talk too much about green roofs, green walls, but this can be a strategy to observe also extreme wave, stream of very heavy precipitation. I found this, I took this picture in the internet, but I found some examples like this, even in Brazil. These are bus stops where with air conditioner. This is a way to at least to help people to be more comfortable on cities, or we can just use the water and get fun with the kids to cooler ourselves a little bit in the summer. So things like having cool roofs or painting the roofs in white in order to increase the albedo or the reflection or absorb this energy to produce electricity. Then we have an additional income. This is a good possibility. And also, for instance, in coastal areas, most of the structures are these heavy artificial reefs that to protect the coastal areas for erosion. but we can have, like we saw in Manaus, they have these pillars to protect the house from extreme floods, or we can have, and nowadays they are implementing this type of approach to make this restoration with the branches and with the mango system. So putting vegetation and trying to regenerate the mangoes are really an important strategy. They did this in several countries. I think they did this in Brazil. They are doing this in Nigeria. They are very good examples of this type of situations where we can't have. So I think these groups of association of cities like C40 or these Eurocities or the Convenant of Mayors are very important uh, places of sharing. They have meetings, they can share their practices, and we can learn with the process. We can learn also with the failures, because sometimes things don't exactly happen as we wish. I don't know if I answer your question, but it's just some examples of what we can do on these situations.
Certainly, you did. Thank you very much. I must say the Covenant of Mayors program, or in Latin America, it's called Pacto de los Alcaldes. Es un programa de la Unión
Exactly.
Europea, es el que está comentando Myriam, también Pacto dos Prefeitos. Acho que vai ser em português, não sei, mas
Em brasileiro, é perfeitos. Em português, presidentes de quê?
autarcas,
São autarcas, alcaides.
autarcas.
Sim.
Entonces, sí, esto es un programa que los compañeros, si queréis, podéis googlear Pacto de los Alcaldes y ahí vais a ver pues lo que dice Miriam, muchísima información de ciudades que se han unido al pacto y que de alguna manera pues quieren contribuir a una transición de sus ciudades pues más verdes, resilientes y adaptadas al cambio climático. Muy interesante. Em,
Mas,
continuamos, vamos a...
but,
Sí,
uh,
disculpa.
so I would like just to add a point. Of course, we can share a lot of examples here. I think I have more than, I don't know, 100 slides with examples of technologies but at the end, what is important is uh, to think locally on the existing local problems. So you need to bring together all these points that I try to share here about the geographic location, about the urban morphology, about because each city and each community has their own problems. So you need to account with the questions related with the cultural heritage of the area, or the type of population, or the skills and capability we have, and the possibilities of the governments, the economic conditions. So it's not, we don't have a kind of recipe that you go to the doctor, they give you a recipe for this problem. Each city has their own problem, and they need to think about and what is the best approach to address and to solve and to increase resilience. There is no solution that is a universal solution for everybody.
Ujú, ujú, correcto. Sí. De hecho, es verdad que en estos programas suele haber, no sé si en todos, pero sí que suele haber un componente de intercambio de conocimiento, pero también de experiencias, justamente para que ciudades que pueden ser similares o con problemáticas parecidas puedan conversar, puedan compartir y a partir de ahí adaptar, exactamente justo eso, adaptar aquello que puede ser sostenible o interesante o adecuado a cada ciudad, porque como dice Miriam, Cada urbe tiene sus condiciones y tiene que realmente pensar desde ese punto de vista, y no en el extraer de los demás, sino que también desde el interior ver cómo podemos funcionar. Pero bueno, está muy bien el intercambio de información y de conocimiento que pueda haber con ciudades que tengan, pues, características similares y problemáticas similares. Es muy interesante.
And we need also to consider that this type of approach, they are voluntary schemes, so you are not
Correct.
obliged to do it. But for
Yes.
instance, in Portugal and in European Union countries, we have now a new law that is the climate law that
Mhm.
obliges each municipality to have its own plan. So they have a timeline to have plans for decarbonization, fulfill the targets and
Mhm. Mhm.
that we assume as Europe, we assume in reducing carbon emissions, but at the same time, we need to implement adaptation plans and also to address the energy efficiency. So now it's an obligation by law that cities should implement these plans. And what we can recognize in Portugal and in Europe in general is that the cities that have been involved in this Covenant of Mayors, in the Pacto dos Alcaides. They are in the front line of so they are much more prepared because they already think about these problems in advance. Now they already have their plans and they are revising the plans. Eventually, they have also these strategies and adaptation plans to apply for fundings because and they already have a kind of different mindset and a network of interactions, including this scientific
Mhm.
ecosystem, because they are working together with universities, with other type of. They are also being involved in research projects as pilot cities. And this is also an opportunity. And we can see this in other countries. I know that, for instance, in Brazil, I have a lot of colleagues in Brazil. I have much more connections in Brazil. I visit other countries in South America. I was in Venezuela and in Mexico. But at least in Brazil, they have already this network where they put together the pilot cities as a life laboratory to research because from universities we are developing like this LAIF City Life project. We are developing things, and then we
Mhm.
need to test, and then we need to transfer this knowledge to population, to society. So it's very important when these cities already have this type of mindset because they have much more opportunities to be involved and to get additional funds to implement and to be more resilient. And this is also a key factor for local government, I think.
Definitely. Okay, well, we can stay here the whole afternoon. I might say I'm a passionate of adaptation and climate change, so for me it will be not a problem, but I don't want to abuse. And so I'm just gonna pose a last question for you, Miriam. Vamos a poner la última pregunta más que nada porque no queremos robar mucho más tiempo y también a los participantes aquí tampoco entiendo que tendrán otras ocupaciones. Entonces vamos a terminar con una última pregunta. La hago en español, Miriam, y si hay algún inconveniente también la hacemos en inglés. Em, Está relacionada con el tema social, el componente social del cambio climático, y es la siguiente. ¿Cómo trabajar la sensibilización y adaptación climática con comunidades vulnerables en ciudades pluriculturales, como las hay en Guatemala, respetando sus identidades y evitando enfoques que puedan percibirse como imposiciones externas, sin perder una visión integral de la ciudad. Es una pregunta muy interesante.
It's interesting and also complex. But if you
Sí.
think on cities, on urban space, they are an aggregation of small communities. So each community has usually they has their own identity, and we need to respect this. From my experience, and again, I had the experience in Portugal. We don't have in a such pronounced way this connection between the city and the communities itself. It's more continuous and homogeneous. But even so, my experience in Brazil and in Manaus, in Amazonia, was very interesting. It's no sense. Sometimes people are doing this work without talking with the people, without understand their feelings. So we need to learn with them because they have their own perspective and they have a huge wisdom about the process. They know much better than us what is going on, what are the problems, and they have also their own perception. So, for instance, one of the first works I was supervising a PhD thesis in Manaus, and the first work was doing a focus group with population, and we were asking people if they feel we have these groups on the communities with different ages, including kids. Kids can make different representation with that storytelling or with draws. They represent what they see and the problems they face. For instance, during the dry season, they could not go to the school because there are no routes, there are no water for them to go to the school. And for instance, fishermen, they are claimed that, for instance, 20 years ago, they wake up at 7 to go fishing, and nowadays this is no more possible. They need to wake up at 5 because otherwise they will have this quentura. Quentura is very hot days, and they cannot be there at such time. So at 8 they should come back home. And they could preserve, and the old times they could preserve the fish in the water, but nowadays the temperature of the water is higher and they cannot preserve the fish anymore, and they don't have freezers. So uh, it's a completely different reality for me, at least, because I am very comfortable in Portugal. So going to the community, it's very important. It's talking with people and try to live with them if possible to understand and share with them. But we cannot solve these problems based in our mindset, in our perspectives of the problems. We need to see what are their perspectives and what is convenient in terms of adaptation, what is convenience for these people. Sometimes we have this type of adaptation strategies and measures that we are scratching, putting in the scrap, so in a paper, and then this don't works at all. So it's very, very important to have this collaboration. And of course, there are not a single true. There are different truths, and we need to balance them and putting people together in order to uh, and yeah, empathy is an important issue and is something that is missing nowadays in our world. We can see every day in the newspaper people are not open to understand the others and the other perspective. We are always thinking that our perspective is much more important than the perspective of others. And maybe this is why I really love to go to these countries to travel and to learn with people. I think we need to communicate more and to be more together in order to be able to develop a better world for the future. Otherwise, it will not be a problem for the world, for the planet. This will be a problem for humanity. Climate change is not a problem for the planet, it's a problem for humanities. So, yeah, I think this is a good last word.
Well, what can I say? Um, many thank you for the time, Miriam. Quería agradecer la generosidad ofrecida por participar además en este espacio y por compartir tantísimo conocimiento con todos nosotros. Ha sido un placer. Espero y esperamos seguir en contacto y de alguna manera volver a repetir la experiencia, si puede ser.
Muchas
Eh,
gracias para mí también, porque ha sido un placer muy grande y pues que me pueden contactar si quieren algo más o alguna idea o algún documento, luego me lo digan.
sí,
Gracias.
estaremos en contacto. Perfecto. Tienen ahí el email, así que están bienvenidos a contactar directamente con Miriam y les aconsejo que aprovechen y que aprovechen la oportunidad, porque es única, la verdad. Así que nada, tenía también, quería cerrar agradeciendo a todas las personas que han asistido una vez más a esta masterclass que va a quedar grabada, como saben, y que la compartiremos en nuestra página web, que es lifecitylife.es y también en el canal de YouTube. Por último, aprovechar y recordarles que el próximo día 18 de junio, que es un jueves, tendremos la próxima sesión de la Universidade de Aveiro, que será a cargo de Bruno Augusto, que él, entre otras cosas, es doctor en Ingeniería y Ciencias Ambientales y su sesión se titulará Soluciones basadas en la naturaleza y sostenibilidad urbana. Así que entiendo y vamos, sabemos que va a ser muy interesante. Podrán encontrar más información en la sección de comunicación de nuestra web y en las redes sociales de LinkedIn e Instagram en los próximos días y les esperamos. Muchas gracias y seguimos.